Hey everyone, Julian Cross here with Alina Harper for Presidential Power, Unplugged, a Topic Lake Insights production. And today we're going to be looking at how presidents can really steer policy, especially through executive orders and presidential proclamations and executive memoranda.
Yeah.
You know, Article 2 of the Constitution grants executive power to the president.
Yeah.
But how's it played out over time?
Well,
What are the legal twists and turns?
that's a great question. And what's so fascinating is that you have all these different tools at a president's disposal.
Right.
And they all have their own set of rules and implications.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Elena, can you just break down like the distinctions between these three
Sure.
executive orders, proclamations, and executive memoranda?
Yeah.
They all sound very official.
Right. They're all directives coming from the president.
Yeah.
But they each have different characteristics.
Okay.
So think of executive orders as instructions aimed at government officials and agencies. They carry the weight of law, especially if they're based on something in the Constitution or a law passed by Congress.
So that's like the serious stuff.
Yes,
They're putting it all out there in black and white.
exactly. Now, proclamations are a bit different. They're typically directed at the public, not just government folks.
Right.
You often see them used for ceremonial things.
Right.
But don't be fooled.
Yeah.
They can have serious legal and policy implications, too.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Like declaring a national emergency.
Uh-huh.
That's a proclamation, right?
Absolutely.
But it has huge consequences.
Yes, declaring national emergencies, granting pardons,
Right.
even things like President Bush declaring disaster areas after Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, wow.
These are all proclamations.
Okay.
And they can really pack a punch.
Yeah.
And then we have executive memoranda. These are kind of like executive orders,
Okay.
but a little less formal. They don't have to be published in the Federal Register.
So you're telling me there's a way for a president to direct things without everyone knowing about it?
Well, there are.
That's
Seems
some arguments.
like ripe for misuse.
On both sides about that.
Okay.
Transparency versus efficiency, that kind of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. So executive orders are for the government.
Uh-huh.
Proclamations are for the public.
Yes.
And memoranda are for whatever a president needs them for.
You got it.
Okay.
But the key takeaway is that the name isn't everything.
Okay.
The legal effect of each directive really boils down to where its authority comes from.
Right.
Is it from the Constitution?
Right.
Or is it based on a law Congress has passed?
Uh-huh.
Courts are much more likely to uphold something and it has that strong legal backing.
It's not just what you call it. It's like,
Right.
did Congress give you the green light to do this?
It's about that balance of power.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction.
And keep in mind that courts tend to give more leeway to presidential actions in areas like foreign policy and national security.
Compared to things like economic or social issues.
That makes sense. It's all about context.
Yes.
You can't just wave a magic wand even if you are the president.
Right.
So can you give us like some concrete examples
Sure.
of how these different directives have played out in history?
Absolutely. Let's start with a big one. President Truman's Executive Order 9981, which desegregated the U.S. military.
Wow.
That was huge.
Talk about a game changer.
Both legally and for civil rights. It just shows you how much impact a single executive order can have.
Yeah.
And on the proclamation side, we've got some heavy hitters too. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War.
Right.
Talk about a proclamation that fundamentally changed the course of history.
Wow.
Then there was President Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon.
So proclamations aren't just for declaring National Donut Day.
Definitely not.
Okay.
Remember those disaster area declarations after Hurricane Katrina?
Right.
Those had a big impact on relief efforts and government funding.
Yeah.
And finally, for executive memoranda. Well, these are often used for things like making presidential decisions and delegating authority. They might not always grab the headlines, but they're kind of the workhorses of presidential directives, quietly making things happen behind the scenes.
So what you're saying is don't underestimate the power of a good memo.
Well, in the president's hands, they can be much more powerful than that.
I always thought they were just for reminding your roommate to take out the trash.
Right.
All this talk about power makes me think, you know, we've been focusing on the president's power, but what about the power of the people? How can everyday citizens make their voices heard?
That's a great question, Julian.
And maybe even influence these big decisions that shape our lives.
And it's one we'll definitely be exploring more in the next part of our show. It's all about understanding, that our system of government isn't just about the president calling all the shots.
Right.
We, the people, have a say.
I love that.
And that's incredibly powerful.
Power to the people.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work, like in practice? We can't all just show up at the White House and demand to see the president.
Wouldn't that be something?
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, there are more structured ways to make your voice heard.
Okay.
Voting, of course, is crucial. It's your chance to choose the leaders who represent your values and your priorities.
Right, but it doesn't stop there.
But doesn't stop there.
I know I've heard that whole stay engaged spiel before, but does it really make a difference? Like, does writing to your congressman actually change anything?
You'd be surprised. Those letters, those phone calls, those emails, they do get noticed, especially when there's a groundswell of public opinion on a certain issue.
Really?
And don't forget about advocacy groups.
Right.
Joining forces with others who share your concerns can amplify your voice and put even more pressure on decision makers.
Okay, so it's not just about griping about politics on social media. It's about actually taking action.
That's right.
Participating in the process.
Exactly.
But let's be real, change doesn't happen overnight. So how do you stay motivated when it feels like, those in power aren't listening?
Well, that's where understanding the historical context can be so helpful.
Okay.
Think about those examples we discussed earlier. Desegregation, the Emancipation Proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
These were monumental changes.
Right.
But they didn't happen easily.
Yeah.
It took years, decades even, of persistent activism and pressure from the people to make those things a reality.
That's a good point. Progress can be slow.
Yeah.
But it does happen. And speaking of historical context, I'm curious about how the use of these presidential directives has changed over time.
Yeah.
Has it always been this way?
That's a fascinating question. And you're right. The use of executive orders, proclamations, and memoranda has definitely fluctuated throughout history.
Okay.
It often reflects the political climate of the time and even the personality of the president in office. Some presidents have been more inclined to use these tools aggressively,
Right.
while others have been more restrained.
So it's not just about the legal authority, it's also about
Right.
how each president chooses to wield that power.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a personality test for presidents.
I like that analogy.
Right.
And it speaks to this ongoing debate
Yeah.
about the balance of power between the different branches of government.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who believe in a more expansive view of presidential power,
Okay.
especially during times of crisis.
Right.
But there are others who advocate for greater oversight from Congress, for more checks and balances to prevent any one person from having too much power.
It's that whole absolute power corrupts absolutely thing.
Exactly. And it's a debate that continues to this day.
Wow.
Every time a president issues a particularly impactful directive, it sparks renewed discussion about just how far executive authority should extend.
I'm starting to see how all this is relevant to our listeners' lives.
Yeah.
Even if they don't, follow politics religiously.
Mm-hmm.
These decisions made at the top can have a ripple effect on everything from healthcare to immigration to environmental regulations. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah, and that's why staying informed and engaged in the political process is so crucial.
Right.
Understanding how these levers of power work empowers citizens to hold their elected officials accountable.
Exactly.
And advocate for the changes they want to see.
That's right.
So it's not just about the president. It's about all of us. We, the people, have a role to play in shaping the direction of our country.
That's precisely it. The story of presidential power is ultimately intertwined with the story of the American people.
Right.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Well, I think we've done a pretty fantastic job of unpacking, these complex topics.
I agree.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the historical context to the legal nuances of presidential directives.
And we've even touched on that crucial role that citizens play in this whole system.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. We've talked a lot about, the different types of directives, their legal basis, and how they've been used throughout history. But here's a question. What do you think is like the most surprising or unexpected way a presidential directive has shaped the course of American history? Something that might not be widely known, but had a profound impact, nonetheless. Think about that, and we'll be back in a moment to explore it further. So we're back, and I'm still pondering that question. And any thoughts on a surprising or unexpected way a presidential directive has shaped American history?
Well, one that always comes to mind for me is Executive Order 9066, signed by President Roosevelt during World War II.
Okay, yeah, that rings a bell. It had something to do with Japanese internment camps, right?
Exactly. It authorized the military to designate areas from which any and all persons may be excluded.
Oh,
And this ultimately led to the forced relocation and internment of over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry,
right.
most of whom were American citizens.
That's a pretty sobering example.
Yeah.
Shows how a presidential directive, even one issued during a time of national crisis, can have a devastating impact on individual lives.
It's a dark chapter in American history, and it really underscores the importance of, critical thinking,
Yeah.
even when faced with wartime anxieties.
Right.
It's crucial to question authority and consider the long-term consequences of what may seem like swift action.
It's a reminder that presidential power, while vast, is not absolute and needs to be exercised with great care and consideration.
Absolutely. And it also highlights the importance of having a robust system of checks and balances in place
Right.
to prevent abuses of power.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Elena.
I agree.
We've explored the complexities of presidential directives,
Yeah.
delved into their historical and legal context, considered their real-world implications, both positive and negative.
Right. We've seen how these directives can be used for good, like desegregating the military,
Right.
but also for harm, as in the case of Japanese internment.
It's a reminder that power is a double-edged sword.
It is.
It's been fascinating and thought-provoking, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that they, too, have a role to play in shaping the course of history.
That's right.
Whether it's through voting advocacy or simply stay informed, their actions matter.
The story of presidential power is ultimately a story about the American people.
Yeah.
Their rights, their responsibilities, and their enduring capacity to make their voices heard.
Well, thanks for joining us today on Presidential Power Unplugged.
Thanks for having me.
To explore presidential documents in detail, visit www.topiclake.com to stay